Hi there, this is Elise Bennin, your marketing mentor. And this is the podcast for you if and only if you are ready to leave the feast or famine syndrome behind, and I mean for good. Welcome back for part 2 of my conversation with my good friend Loren Sherman on the day he sold his 23-year-old contract furniture business. We pick up the story with the prototype for a bed that doubles as a dining room table and a dream launch at a big trade show that couldn't have gone better, except that he was, as he says, monumentally unprepared for it. Still, he managed to get the bed onto the Oprah Winfrey show, and that's not nothing. But most important, Loren shares how he is looking back lightly on the mistakes he made and on everything he didn't know. He shares some wise words about how to think about those mistakes while they're happening, so you don't have to waste too much time beating yourself up about it. I loved this conversation, which I think you can probably hear in my voice, and I hope you do too. So listen and learn. All right, Loren, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back.
And for people who have not yet heard part 1 of this conversation, please introduce yourself.
Okay. Loren Sherman. I fell in love with theater in high school. I had a 20-year career as a set designer in New York at Broadway and off-Broadway and regional theaters. Then I kind of actually branched towards more corporate set design work, like for product launch meetings and trade shows and things like that. And then I ended up starting a furniture company called Innova. It's actually now called Innova Bed, that manufactured space-saving, multifunctional, transforming furniture that I had designed. I designed one piece to start the company and have designed plenty more since then. And I started the company 23 years ago as the founder and the designer, and retired about 3 hours ago.
And we also...
Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't use the word retired.
Exactly.
I sold the sale of the company was formalized 3 hours ago, and I'm on to my third career. So.
And are you drinking champagne tonight?
Tonight we will be drinking champagne, yes.
Excellent. I think I will too, by the way.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay.
All right. So we're doing a 2-part conversation to celebrate the sale of your company. And I was telling you recently, I mean, we've known each other for many, many years.
Yeah.
But I was telling you recently that for some reason I've been obsessed with the sale of your company and texting you every day. Is it over? Is it done yet? Is it done yet?
Yeah.
And so you were gracious enough to keep me in the loop and also be willing to share, your process, because I just find it fascinating. I don't know. I'm just endlessly fascinated.
Well,
by...
I was interrogating you about why you were finding it fascinating.
That too. And we figured it all out, but that's a little too personal for the podcast, right?
No, of course, yeah.
Another cliffhanger there.
Yeah.
But so let's talk about Innova. I mean, and actually, one of the questions or issues that you brought up also is this idea that your way of being a creative professional, which is my audience, is different from most of the people who listen to the podcast, I think, from what I understand of who my listeners are, because you're not a graphic designer, you're not a copywriter, you're not offering a service, basically, although set design is, I would think, a service, and it was something that you offered. But now, or the business, the company that you created was more a product. And I'm sure that's very different in terms of how creativity fits in. So we can kind of layer that in to the conversation. But tell us about Innova or Innova Bed and just kind of orient us also, because you told the story of how the idea came to you. But what I want to know is how it went from the idea and the first prototype to a business with how many employees does the company have today?
We had 100 before COVID. We're
Okay.
trying to get back to 100. We're having trouble finding people, but we're at about 70 now.
So how did it go from prototype to 70 employees with a big, factory and everything that goes in the factory?
Yes. Well, the quick answer, how did it go, is very, very unsmoothly.
Oh, yeah?
But something came to mind when you were just bringing this up that I realized that I want to say before I forget it, which is that we manufacture some products that you can buy in, these 3 wood finishes and so on, and standard products. But the main life of the company was what's called contract furniture, which means custom furniture. Contract means a hotel wants 500 of something, and the designer that they hire has to justify, and obviously wants to have a very particular flavor for that particular hotel, project that they're doing. So there's actually a lot of design interaction back and forth through that process. It's not just cranking out a product; it's how to adapt it, how to, the look of it, how the look of it can be done to not interfere with the mechanism of it, all those kinds of things. So that part of my, the part of me that used to work with directors and playwrights and so on, and in a listening back and forth and responding, it played out really well as far as that goes.
Yeah. And let me just add one thing then, so I don't forget it. This idea of listening back and forth and responding is something that I think you and I talk about and do a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't think I mentioned this to you recently when we were talking, but I heard Adam Moss on a podcast, who used to be the editor of New York Magazine and New York Times Magazine. He kind of created these magazines or refreshed them over the years. And anyway, he's got a new book out, which I'm loving, called The Work of Art.
Okay.
And it's all about process. And in his interview with Alan Alda on Alan Alda's podcast called Clear and Vivid, which is one of my favorites, he said, "I thrive in response." And I just love those 4 words together, because I feel like that's me. I thrive in response. And it sounds like you also thrive in response.
Yes, I actually that made me flash back to times that as a set designer where I'd be just listening to a conversation between a director and a playwright or whatever for the first time, or something was going to be produced, and I would just, I would ask questions, and I would be involved, but mostly I was just watching to see what sparked in my mind from what they were saying. They weren't talking about sets; they were talking about the content of the play, but all sorts of things were firing in my mind about the set design possibilities themselves.
Yeah.
I felt like I had a little bit of preparation in terms of just getting over, a complete resistance to the idea that I could have a furniture company. Right. I heard somebody many years before say, she worked in interior design and some other kinds of design. And she said, it's very difficult to have a furniture company in the United States. And it's almost like I held on to that, like, okay, good. I'm spared. Yeah. I'm spared the trouble of starting a furniture company because, it's very difficult to start a furniture company.
You'll never make it.
Yes, you'll never make it or whatever. And I got over that. I went to a trade show that had some sort of younger, more experimental young companies showing things at it's called the ICFF show in New York, International Contemporary Furniture Fair, and got some confidence, almost like, well, they don't seem to know what they're doing either. So I might as well just dive in. And I did. Next time that show happened, I did dive in, and I showed an early model of the table, what I call the table bed, the one that turns from a bed to a table. Mm-hmm. And I was monumentally unprepared for it. I mean, I remember talking to a guy who was helping give me a little bit of advice, like trying to make up a price, what the price point would be for it the morning of the trade show. And just like winging it. I didn't have any way of manufacturing it and so on, which, may be fine if you just want to show a prototype of some, or some new design and get some feedback about it and then see how you want to develop it. But unfortunately for me, or fortunately, I got a really great response to it.
Mm.
And I think I got calls from 150 architectural firms. It actually won Best New Product of the Year. Not Architectural Digest, a different architectural record magazine. And, and it wasn't even a product because I didn't have any way of manufacturing it. And I got a call from the Oprah Winfrey Show that they were doing a show all about space-saving furniture, and could they have this on the show? And they did. So basically, I had this, a fantastic, a kind of launch that any furniture, any company person, anybody starting a company would dream of, and I was completely unprepared for it. So
but the question is then, would you have done it differently, or what did you scramble and figure out? Because obviously, whatever it was, it worked.
Yeah, it worked eventually, and it's interesting to to really look at what I'm going through now that I've sold it, which is, obviously there's a sense of freedom and moving on to a different chapter of life, but I also know that for the last couple of weeks I've been going through in my head all the mistakes that I made along the way, but not in any kind of negative way. Like, that was interesting. I certainly understand why I didn't know this or that. And there's something, I don't know, very light about it. It's not, I'm not beating myself up for it. It's just interesting to know that the process of doing this is just loaded with inevitable mistakes. So you can kind of relax and just do the best you can with it.
And that actually, I often sum up as, who cares anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a good way to express the kind of lightness of looking back on it and say, sure, I could have done it differently. I mean, what's interesting is I've sold the company. The company's now like right at the cusp of a change in its business model or growth of its business model. We used to focus mostly on developing these products for what I refer to as the contract furniture industry for hotels, where each time you get an order for 200 of them or 500 of them or 2,000 of them or whatever, you have to go through the whole process of the custom design work and get in materials and so on. And it's a very kind of labor, not factory labor, but engineering and back and forth with the client kind of process. So there are inefficiencies in it, in a sense, and it's hard to charge enough to really be more profitable that way. And we've launched our e-commerce business in a big way, where these models are available to ship in 48 hours. They come in several different finishes, different upholsteries, and so on, and for people to buy them for their homes, and they're standard, and we can manufacture them much more efficiently. Basically, 1/4 of the factory will be devoted to that part of our business, and it will make as much money as the whole other 3/4 that is fussing over the custom work and the special graphic images that go into the Disney beds and things like that. So, so I had 23 years with a business model that was pretty tough, and it even took us a while to realize that we needed to raise our minimums so that we wouldn't do a custom order for fewer than 100 units or something like that.
Right.
Just so that it made more sense.
And there's something, I just want to go back to the idea of looking back lightly at the mistakes or the things that you didn't know or maybe could not have known. Because I imagine, now I'm channeling my listeners, they're in the middle of that and struggling with it some. And I'm wondering if there's something you would suggest they say to themselves in the middle of it all, to know that, 20 years hence or 10 years hence, you could be looking back so lightly and with gratitude at where it's taken you, but what can one say to oneself in the middle of it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because I don't want to rub it in to anybody who's listening that I'm 69 years old and looking at things with a kind of a philosophical distance and looking forward to just taking my dog to visit the hospitals all the time. That there's much more at stake. There was a lot at stake for me, and I just feel like one thing I would think is that it's far more useful to focus on how to improve things, how to keep your eyes and your ears open for how to do better with fewer mistakes or correct the mistakes than it is to drive yourself crazy about the mistakes. Like energy spent beating yourself up is bad news, multiplied by 3 because you're spending time doing the beating, you're spending time receiving the beating, and you're not free to just say, hey, well, yeah, I did that for 6 months, but hey, I heard something that triggered a better way of approaching it that I'll start to do in 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And one of the things I did want to touch on is the idea of partnerships.
Yeah.
Because I know you've had over these 23 years various partnerships. And I know that often, perhaps my listeners, but people often tell me, oh, I wish I had a partner.
Yeah.
And so what can you say about what worked and what didn't work? And what advice would you have? Just talk about partnerships a bit.
Well, when I got all that great response from that first trade show and really was in no way prepared to meet it with any kind of success or with even a company truly in place. I floundered around for a couple of months, just almost like trying to just put off my response to these architects and so on. And I did end up, I don't even remember how, I think I advertised for somebody not to be my business partner, but for some other role like production director or something like that, as if somebody would just help me figure out how to produce it. And somebody responded, and it turns out they were really in the position. His name was Jerry Blackwell. He was very much in the position to understand the business side of things. He'd had experience in
mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah. M&A, yes, mergers and M&A, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing he said to me, which was very helpful once he decided to come on board, and he wasn't a partner immediately. He was a fellow, executive. Like it was just the two of us were getting this company started.
But you were paying him a salary, or
I was paying him a salary. He was not
Okay.
an owner yet. But the first thing he said is just, put the brakes on everything. Say to the architects, I'm sorry, we're just not ready to do this yet. We got ahead of ourselves or whatever, and just back off the craziness and the pressure and the sense of running after a train that had already left the station. And, and that was very helpful. And then it was the kind of classic partnership of me as the kind of wild, creative, absent-minded professor guy, and he was the one who was the business, keep things organized and think it through from a business point of view better. And that aspect worked for quite a while, and he did end up having 50% of the company at one point. And we did trade shows, and we got discovered by Disney, which was the main thing. We also did production for the U.S. government. We did Air Force bases and naval bases and things like that. But we got discovered by Disney at a trade show or several trade shows, and that really kind of got us going in a far more successful direction because we could really count on, even right now we have a couple of years worth of Disney contracts sort of waiting out there for us, which is great.
But looking back, would he have been better just as an employee, or was it the partnership that allowed for the growth?
A lot of the growth happened before he was a partner. It became a little bit of a contentious or difficult relationship. There were, any kind of partnership. It obviously works best when it's a very well balanced partnership. The factory was in Albany, New York, and I lived in New York City. So he was kind of running our office from the New York City part of the office, and I was the one who was traveling back and forth and staying up there for a week at a time, for the full week practically. And that it was difficult. I mean, just the expectations and the fact in certain ways, you could say that when he became a partner, in some ways, I ended up working for him as if I was a salaried person, because he had the expertise about business, so I didn't feel like I had that much say in enough say in things, and it became difficult. It became contentious, and it had to be brought to an end.
Mm-hmm. I just find it interesting because, again, I think people imagine partnerships to be a certain way. All types of relationships, I suppose, we could be speaking about. And I don't know what the ideal situation is, but I do know the advice I always give is don't rush into it, basically.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, because in order for it to work, I mean, I think the ideal partnership is one where both people recognize that the other person truly balances them out. And whatever, what they're, which if you really want to get sort of spiritual about it, it would be like between the two of you, you make one complete person, and fill in all the gaps for each other, and do it in a way that's not, that doesn't have sense of power about it, that just has a sense of, as beautiful cooperation as possible. That doesn't mean it's not difficult to decide on certain choices or directions, but you do it by exploring it together, not by one person overpowering the other. And at one point when things had gotten difficult, he asked me, when I think I pushed back on something that didn't make sense to me. And he said, well, I mean, are you ready to run this company? And that's a question that I had answered no several times. And that time I said yes. And we went from there. And what was interesting about it is that I was ready to run it. I mean, that doesn't mean there weren't mistakes there too, but I had learned by paying attention to the business side and learning along the way that enough to at least make a transition.
And the metaphor that comes to my mind about that type of thing is, and I use this often with clients also who are thinking along the same lines, is that relationship was like training wheels for you, basically. And now you're ready to take the training wheels off and ride the bike by yourself.
Yes, I think that's pretty good. Yeah. Yeah. And the training wheels kept me from killing myself.
Exactly.
In terms of riding the bike off the edge of a cliff or something, falling off the edge of a cliff. But yes.
So let's come back. We're going to have to wrap up shortly, but I want to come back to this idea of business baggage, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Because I just feel like all of us, we're human, we can't help but bring our own personal baggage into business relationships.
Yeah.
And I guess I want to ask, what have you learned over the years about how to deal with that, how to keep it separate, how to drop some of the baggage? And I'll just give you one example that came up this morning, actually, in my situation. And maybe this is part of the answer too, which is, get someone else's eyes eyes on the situation. But someone asked me something this morning, and my immediate, and it felt very emotional answer was no. And I wasn't sure if that was the right answer. So I went to someone that I work with and trust and respect their perspective. And it's usually very objective. And he said the same thing. Oh, no, definitely not. So for me, part of this dealing with business baggage is just make sure you have someone objective that you can talk to and, kind of sift the real baggage from the reality. So with that, what would you say? What's your
I would
view?
say, I mean, I zeroed in on the word sift when you were talking about it, because I feel like one of the things that's helped me is that I feel like I was so ready to give other people sort of the voice of control, or the voice, like, and feeling torn because, oh, someone said we should do this, and someone else said we should do this, and someone else said we should do this. You know, your example, you said no. You were listening to your own voice. Now, when you talk to that other person and that was kind of reinforced, it makes me think that the wisdom of what that other person said had already been inside you from some other sources over the years. You know, like you'd picked up the logic that that person was using to say no to this thing, and you had said it yourself.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, that's a little confusing the way I said it, but to me, one of the best ways to avoid baggage is to just hear your own voice as clearly as possible in your response to things. Now, that does not mean you just do whatever you want and do whatever you think and cut everybody else out. You listen to everybody and anybody, and it all becomes part of the mix of what's in your head in terms of looking at a problem or a situation or an opportunity, but then to try to be as clear as possible to hear your own voice about what to make of everything that's come into your mind from it, about it.
Yeah. So that makes me think, again, listening and kind of thriving in response, but also sitting quietly until you can distinguish the business baggage or the baggage inside from, I don't know, something more true, more real, more authentic.
Yeah, I mean, things that come from, you know, power and history and, you know, your own, like you were referring to, you know, your own developmental issues that you might be carrying around, separate that out from what makes sense in the world.
Yeah.
And that and to kind of give yourself the trust to say, you know, that if you look at something and hear lots of different points of view about it, you could be pretty good at sifting out what really works.
I love this idea of trust as a place to end this conversation.
Oh, okay.
Also,
Okay, good.
Loren, actually, is there anything else you want to say about trusting oneself? Because I know that is something you've really been focused on in the last couple of years.
Yeah. I don't know. One thing that pops into my mind is referring to the mistakes again. Like to trust also comes from not beating yourself up and just saying that we're all new at anything that we're doing, and we're learning along the way, and it's going to be much more effective to relax and focus on the problems that need to be solved than to focus on the history and the power and the angst and everything else.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I think you said this was your second podcast ever. I think you did a pretty good job.
No, it's not my second. It's my first. It's
your first. All right. Well, then you did an awesome job.
Jesus. Okay. All right.
No, this was really, really beautiful. Thank you so much, Loren, for sharing.
Okay, my pleasure.
And is there a place people can go find, I don't know, you or InnovaBed? Should they ask their AI? Like, who is this Loren Sherman and what's his story?
Oh, I don't know. You could, I mean, just doing a search for me probably shows up a few things. But
the picture of Oprah, right? You on Oprah? Was it you or just the bed?
No, I wasn't on Oprah. There was just the bed.
Okay.
But the company is innovabed.com.
Mm-hmm.
And
let's spell it just in case.
INOVABED.com.
Beautiful. So if anyone wants one of these very fancy, much better Murphy bed type of things, a bed that turns into a table, among other things, you can go there and get one.
Yes, and it's not that I think they're beautiful, but they're not about being fancy. They're about being extremely practical and beautiful at the same time.
I love that. Yes. Yep. Thank you for correcting me.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Elise. This is there's something new every day. This is my first podcast.
I look forward to your fourth career where we do podcasting with Loren and Elise.
Okay, good.
All right, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I do hope you learned a little something from these conversations with Loren. I just love his relaxed way of reflecting on the past with his very unique sense of humor and his version of the who cares attitude that I've become known for. Try it for yourself next time you're stressed about something that in the long run really doesn't matter. Just say, who cares? In the meantime, if you want to build a thriving business on your own terms, the first step is to sign up for my quick tips at marketing-mentortips.com. Once you're on the site, you'll find lots more resources, including my simplest marketing plan. So enjoy, and I'll see you next time.